Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the video. My name is Saumil Shah. This is a project video where we're going to be building a beautiful front-end application powered by DynamoDB backend, essentially a single table design. So let me show you what we are about to build. And if you're interested, you can keep watching where I'll be showing you step-by-step approach, okay? So here is a very beautiful front-end application, which is basically made in Python Flask. As you can see here, you can see all the popular books that are there, right? I can click on a particular book. For example, I can click on the book and I can see all the details about the book. For example, date, ISBN number, the text, and a beautiful card over here, right? So if I click here, it shows me this book. If I click here, this shows me this book. I can also search book by categories. So if, for example, I want to give me all the books by a category Java. Here you can see it did filter out and give me all the books for the Java, right? So how do we develop this? This is what we are about to develop in this project, powered by DynamoDB Single Table Design. And here is a link where I have taken the code snippets for the front end. So I'm excited. Let's get started, guys. What are you waiting for? So as I said, it's a project, which means I'll walk you step by step over the complete process. Okay. So the first process is the design. So I have three primary entities: author, books, and categories. And if I had to show you the data again quickly, and again, all the code of material is available. So we'll go slowly and step by step. Okay. Here is how the JSON looks like. Okay. And we want to model this in DynamoDB. We have a title, ISBN, page count, publisher date, thumbnail, short description, long description, authors, and categories. So I basically put down all the list of entities on an Excel spreadsheet. So I know I have an author, a book, and a categories. An author can have many books. A books can be assigned to many author. There's a two-way binding here, essentially. So hence I'm referencing. So in the author entity, I'll be referencing the book, and in the book entity, I'll be referencing the author. Books can have categories. So essentially, I'm going to reference my book ID and author ID in the category entity. Then you write down your access pattern, right? So here I'm saying that, hey, I want to get all the books for an author. I want to get all the books by a category, right? When I click on a book, give me all the details, right? These are the ways in which I want to get my data. Then you start the modeling process. Here I'm saying I'm giving generic names to DynamoDB columns. So I'm saying PKSK. So here I'm saying author one, an object, which means there is an author one. One means it's a GUID, it's a random UUID, right? And here is data for that author. So here I'm simulating or showing you two authors. Then I'm simulating a book here, right? So, sorry, this one. So here I'm saying that, oops, sorry about that. Here I'm saying book hash one. So I'm saying book hash one. So basically whenever a user creates a book, right, somebody will enter into the system, right? That's when the book ID would be generated. So basically book hash one means there's a unique identifier after a book. So now I'm saying that this book is written by author one, and essentially it belongs to category one. Now observe what I'm doing here is I'm gonna reference the author in a column. So because now I can query on this particular column, which is nothing but GSI, and I can say for a given author, give me all the books that you have, right? So you saw the access pattern. So for a given author, give me all the books that you have, right? And then I'm also referencing the categories in the books table. So observe here carefully, right? So in the category, I'm referencing the book, right? Because for a book will have many categories, right? So I'm referencing here, right? Oops, this is the design too here. So I'm essentially referencing the categories, right? And I'm also referencing the author in the book, right? So basically for an author, I can say, give me all the books. For a category, give me all the books, right? And for a book, give me all the information. So these are all the ways in which I can query my data. Here is the list of all the categories that the person will have. I'm essentially modeling that using a PKSK. So category will have many values. This is my primary, this is my secondary key. Hopefully that made sense. Now the fields that are important to me, for example, I might want to sort my data based on the book published date, or I might want to search based on ISBN, right? So those fields that are important to me, I'm going to bring it out, and those that are not important, I'm simply going to represent that as an object, a complex attribute, a map object, right? So if you observe, I have done a small, very simple one, but here you can see, I can say for a given book, give me all the authors that you have. I can sort through the authors, right? So here is how the data looks like for a book and author, right? So author will have its name information, books will have its own information, right? So hopefully that made sense, right? So now let's dive into the backend code and let's load the data. So the first thing that you gotta do is, if you come to the project, there's a serverless.yml. You gotta deploy this DynamoDB table. Again, you just gotta change the env variables. Once you do deploy, you will see a DynamoDB table with a name called dev.authorbooks and whatever lab and team number that you have assigned. And again, we are using two global secondary index. I just presented that to you, right? For a given author, give me all the books. For a given category, give me all the books, right? So hence I'm gonna using two global secondary index. If you do deploy the entire stack, this will, if you observe, this will create two GSI, call as GSI PK index, GSI PK index, right? GSI2 PK index, right? So these are my two global secondary index. Now, once you're done with that, let me use the magnifier. So here is the project structure. You will be coming to lab 1, and these are all the files for the lab 1. So now you should come to Python modules, and there's a file called loaddata.py. Now, all you have to do is simply run the Python file, and you have to do literally nothing. This will essentially take the data from this file called data.py. There are more than about, I believe, 2,000-3,000 authors and books, right? So this is gonna load all the data into DynamoDB. In case if you are curious on how I wrote the script, it's actually very easy. So here I'm enumerating over the data, and then for each author, right? So for author, now I'm creating a object author books, and then I'm calling .save, which means it's just gonna create an item in DynamoDB for author. So here I'm assigning an author ID, PK, author SK, then this is the author object, essentially the name of the author and any other attributes that you have. I'm also setting up TTL, which means automatically the items would expire after a year or two, right? So if needed, TTL is a good practice to have. Then I am essentially creating a UUID for a book, because somebody will insert these books, right? So for a single author will can have many books, right? So now I'm doing a simple check. If you have categories as none, right, then I'm doing something else. If you have a category, which means a book can have several categories, then essentially I iterate over the categories, and for each category I essentially create the item in the DynamoDB. So observe, this is the same pattern: book hash, book ID, book hash, book ID, author hash, author ID, category hash, category ID. It's essentially the same approach that I have taught you here: book hash, author hash, category hash, right? So essentially modeling that, right? Then I'm providing the book title, the published date, the price of the book, the ISBN, total pages. Author data is mapped in an object. The reason I'm mapping author data here is because for a given book, I can fetch all the details in a single go. I'm also putting the metadata about the book in a map attribute, right? And then essentially I'm putting the category, and this is my GSI1 PK. So observe here that I'm referencing authors in the book entity, right? So in this particular stuff, I'm referencing the author. So here you can see I'm doing that. And here I'm referencing the categories, which is shown on line number 90. Once that is done, I call .save, which is gonna save the particular item on DynamoDB, right? So now basically this script runs, right? And for the books that do not have category, I'm not putting the word category, and where it says category, I'm simply putting an empty quotes, which means I do not have a category for that book, right? So collapsing all the one, if you run this file, this will essentially load the DynamoDB data. If you come here and click on get live count, and if you click on start scan, this should give you all the data. I have roughly about 1,269 items in that DynamoDB table. That looks great. Now let's hop into the backend code. So the infrastructure code made sense. We did load the data. Now let's start with the front end and the backend. I chose to do this in Flask. Again, the reason is because it is very, very easy to do things in Flask, right? So the first thing that I did here is I have a head and a body, right? This is my nav bar. If you observe carefully, this is my nav bar. This is the bookstore. I'm essentially giving a name. So this is something that would come over here, right? Bookstores. And let's come here, and then I have a div element, and then I have a couple of more div elements, right, which I will go shortly about that. Now when the page loads, I want to load some books. So hence what I did is, first of all, If you observe this default route, whenever a web page loads, this will hit the default route. Now what I did is essentially I simply am doing a scan query on the DynamoDB, and I'm essentially using a limit. So I'm saying that, hey, just give me random 10 books just so I can show on the web UI. Again, these books can be anything. You can choose the best. You can choose the book based on the rating, based on comments, and based on, again, all of these metrics if needed, right? Again, the goal is to show this on the UI. So essentially, I'm doing a list comprehension here on the line 99, and then I'm returning the data on line 101. Once I return the data comes to the JavaScript, that is the front end. And here what I'm doing is, I want to show you something quickly. So here, if you observe, I'm using the variable book data from the front end, and I'll try to close this. This is the variable called book data on line 101, and I'm essentially serializing the data back to JSON. I'm also iterating over all the elements in the JSON, because inside the JSON there are a couple of string JSON, and hence I'm parsing that into a regular JSON or an object, and then I'm storing that in a variable called books. I'm storing that in a variable called books data. So books data is a global variable that I can access through my inspect elements. If I go to inspect element, if I come here, do Control L, and if I say book underscore data, again, when the web page loads, this will give me all the data from the DynamoDB. These are 10 books roughly, right? Hopefully that made sense. Now, when the user puts any item in the basically category section, remember, we want to query the global secondary index here. So hence, what I do is, whenever the user types anything and clicks on the button, when the user clicks on the button go, I have a, here. Hold on, I think it's better I can show you from here. So this purple button that you see on the screen, if you click here, and if I was able to show you, just want to see the name of the function. Again, that's easy. So the name of the function is fn search, right? So when you type something on this button, as you can see the categories, right, and you click on the search, what happens is I'm essentially binding an on-click event. And here I'm basically creating a payload. I'm getting the categories from the front end. Again, on JavaScript, you can easily do that. For example, just to show you quickly, you can use the jQuery $val.trim. This will give you the value from the input field. Now, once I have that, basically I call a method called API call that takes a payload. Now, if you observe here, this basically makes an AJAX call to the backend, which means there's a route in my Python Flask called get books categories. Heading over to the Python, if you observe, there's a route called get books category. And now observe, we have to query our global secondary index, which is here. So for that purpose, what I do is I have to essentially write some more code. So first I started defining my model. Model is where you would define all your PK, SK, and all your attributes that a DynamoDB might have. So I started doing that, if you observe here carefully. Then I basically made my view index. This is my view index, right? In here, I'm specifying what is my global secondary index. So here I'm saying GS2PK is my hash key, which is this particular guy here, right? So I'm defining that, and then I'm essentially creating a view model for categories. Over here, again, I'm defining the entire schema, but if you observe, the only two change here is my hash key now is GS2PK, and I'm essentially instantiating the view index in this class. Now that is done. Now I can easily query my data, which means when the user clicks on this go button, this would fire up a JavaScript function called fn search, which is over here. This will take the payload from the front end, will pass it to a method, and this will make a call to the AJAX, right, which is here in the app.py. This queries my DynamoDB global secondary index, GSI2PK. It grabs the data, and all the data, it would send it to the front end. If needed, you can also paginate by providing a simple limit query here. Now this returns the data, and observe how I'm doing it in the front end. So once I receive the data, I'm storing it in a variable called books API call, and then I'm essentially console logging, and I'm iterating over the data and converting all the data into basically a JSON. Here I'm defining a handlebar.js template. I'm essentially passing the data to a handlebar.js. So now if you observe carefully, there is a template called template book. Again, this is inside a script tag. So here what I'm doing is it will receive all my JSON data, and essentially I'm injecting the variables here. So observe very carefully. This says $each, which means iterate over all the products that you get, or basically all the books that you get. Once you do iterate, now observe here on the line number 485, this .booksmeta.thumbnail URL, which means if I want to show you, so observe, this is an array, right? So I am using the word $each. So I'm saying each data, which means inside each data attribute, this is an array, right? This books metadata. So for each object, and I'll try to use a magnifier. So if you observe, again, this is a data array, right? And here I would have a books meta, and observe that this is an object, and here I have all the details such as thumbnail, long description, short description, etc. So all I'm doing is at this point, I'm simply replacing or injecting the values in the placeholder. For example, here I'm replacing the title, here I'm replacing the author name, etc, etc, etc. Now what happens is, going back to the template really quickly. So let's go back to our FN search. So this is my JavaScript template that I defined, or basically handlebar.js template, and then essentially we pass it to a render template. Again, I have tutorials on handlebar.js. So what this does is, again, I'll explain you in a short. So this is the HTML. This will inject the values in the HTML. It will essentially generate the HTML, and all that generated HTML, it will inject it over here. That's basically what handlebar.js does. If you don't know what handlebar.js is, I strongly recommend you to come and read more, right? So that's basically what it's doing. So now when I type the word Java, what happens is this Java, when I click go, it hits the my JavaScript function that I wrote, that is FN search. It grabs the data from the input variable using a jQuery, makes an API call, AJAX call to the backend. The backend essentially queries my GSI2, iterates over the data, returns to the front end. On the front end, I'm cleaning the data, converting back to the JSON, and I'm using handlebar.js to render that on the UI. So now basically when you type Java and click go, here you can see now behind the scene, this is how it works. When I click on a particular product, I want to fetch all the details, right? So this is all the details about that book. How is that possible? So now I need to query this data. So for a given book, I want to fetch all the details, right? So hence I want to query my main index, right? So what I'm doing here, observe carefully. When I do click on a book, so when I click on any of these, right, card elements, if you observe carefully, I have a on-click event on each card. So I'll try to show you quickly. So observe here that all the development has an on-click event, and I'm essentially passing the book ID to the function. So there's a function called btn book click. So which means anytime I click on a book, what happens is this is gonna call a function. Now let's try to take a look at how I essentially did that, right? So remember that the handlebar.js template, here what I did is I said an on-click event. So which means anytime a person clicks on a book, I want to call a JavaScript function, and I want to pass the primary key of this. Primary key meaning this is the primary key from which I can fetch the entire book. So then what I do is basically btn click. This is a function. So which means anytime you click on the show more, right? So this will fire up a JavaScript function called btn book click. This takes a primary key. Again, I form a payload, and then I make a AJAX call to the backend. I have a route called get.books, get_books, if you observe this correctly. Now I am querying my main index, as you can see, and I'm passing the PK, and I'm essentially getting the data, and I'm returning back to the front end. And the process is pretty much similar. Again, it goes to the same process. I get the data, I console log, I iterate over the data, I use handlebar.js to essentially render my items, and then I'm showing the modal. I have a modal, and I'm essentially going to display the modal. Anything goes wrong, I have a toaster which will say, oops, something went wrong or no result found. For example, really quick, if I type something random and I try to break this, so there's a small toaster, but it looks like due to CSS issue that didn't work that well. But again, the toaster is there. I just need to fix the CSS part. So hopefully that made sense, right? So now let's bring this back. All right. So now hopefully that made sense, right? So now when you do click on a button, when you do click on a book, it will essentially call the function, and this function will make our AJAX call to our Flask backend. The Flask backend will query our DynamoDB. Once we get the data, we essentially iterate over the data, convert it into a JSON, pass it to the handlebar.js, and then essentially render that on the UI. Now let's come back to the UI. Now again, when I type the word Java, I click go, it's querying my GSI, you get all the data. When I click here, I have the PK, and then I essentially query my backend to grab all the data about that particular object. Again, pretty similar, right? Works flawlessly. So what you observe here is the power of a single table design in DynamoDB. I have showed you completely step by step how to design the backend, how to design the front end for DynamoDB, right? So what I do encourage you guys is to come here to the project repository and come and download this and actually come and try this out, because as someone said, right, you learn better when you actually try these labs out. Now let me quickly share my screen. Sorry about the background noise though. All right, so this is it for the project. I hope this did provide you an overall idea how the project is laid, right? How we essentially have modeled it, right? So the first step when working with DynamoDB is you work with an Excel spreadsheet. Write down your entities, write down your access pattern, do a data modeling, design that in NoSQL Workbench. Once that is done, populate some fake data and try to just see if you're able to query the data. Once that's satisfied, then you can start building your POC front end in Flask or whatever you like, Angular, React. I like Flask, is really very easy. I can really build it fast, right? And I pretty much use handlebar.js, right? And then here, I just showed you how easily I was able to quickly build up a POC for author books, right? What you observe is there is no joins here. So see how we have modeled all these in DynamoDB, and now we also developed a UI. So if you're able to do this lab, this will teach you a lot of stuff. It will teach you about DynamoDB, it will teach you about frontend, Flask, JavaScript, handlebar.js, Bootstrap, jQuery, and stuff like that. So I encourage you guys to take out time, sit down, read carefully, go over the code base, and try to just run this project by yourself. That's all I have for you for this video, and I hope you guys have enjoyed. And if you have any more questions, please list your question in the comments. And this particular code snippets for the books I have taken from this link, and as a good practice, you always reference where you have taken the items here, right? So I have copied this snippet from this code pen. That's it for this video. I hope you have enjoyed. If you have any more questions, list your question in the comments, and all the source code is available, so please try it out. And with that being said, keep smiling, keep coding, keep learning. Knowledge is power, and I will see you in the next video.